Welcome to Africa for Dummies, your source for all things Africa. In this episode, we delve into the upcoming election in Zimbabwe, set to take place on August 23rd. The country faces significant challenges, including one of the world's highest inflation rates, a local currency that has drastically lost value in the past 6 months, and rampant corruption allegations. Amidst this backdrop, there are about 10 presidential candidates vying for the position. Join us as we break down the dynamics of this crucial election, only here on Africa for Dummies, where we bring you everything Africa.
I am an African.
We were discussing the issue of a possible surprise election and where maybe we might be seeing different patterns in this election.
So I think definitely with the youth vote in rural areas, or just the rural vote in general, I think Chamisa might actually see some gains there. I also think that we might have suppressed voter turnout in urban areas, which would be bad for the opposition. And people don't talk about this a lot, but in the last election, about 100,000 voters voted for ZANU-PF in Harare. I think that number could go up, especially because of all these trinkets that they're giving.
Yeah.
And also because they've been able to infiltrate by getting like third way candidates in certain constituencies in urban areas to mess with the opposition vote. Obviously, I think Emerson Mnangagwa is going to do well in the mining towns, gold mafia, mafia, whatever you want to call it. Lithium is really big right now.
Yeah, that's everyone is talking about Zimbabwe and lithium, and I think you put an export ban on any raw lithium leaving Zimbabwe.
And yet they are exporting themselves. So, if you know the right people, I think maybe I am kind of interested in the racial minority vote. I think a lot of the older white Zimbabweans, older Indian, Asian Zimbabweans will probably go with Emerson Mnangagwa because they tend to be business owners. And Emerson, they are probably going to align with him if they think this is going to benefit them. Something else we didn't talk about is there is a woman who's running. I don't think she's going to get a lot of votes. People are not really talking about her, but I also think it's still interesting and worth mentioning. Elisabeth Valerio.
Yeah, I think I saw her speak.
But yeah, I think it's cool that she's running. She's always taking her pictures with like cattle and elephants.
And she's the only female candidate at the moment. Wow, yeah. And why is that? Why do you think there's a shortage of female candidates running? I think one person in that talk from Chatham House, which is public, some people were talking about violence, and that was also the same thing. Even I think in Zambia, post-election, there's a much lower percentage of female candidates. But Zimbabwe is even more progressive because I think there are certain seats preserved for women, and these others preserved for people with disabilities. So why that progressive sort of structure?
It's very toxic. It's very toxic. So whenever women enter the political space, they get called names a lot. Like Fadzayi Mahere, last election, people would deface her posters and call her a prostitute. Thokozani Kupe, who was running the MDC before she got kicked out by the Boys Network, people tried to burn her in her heart. So it's a very, very...
Burn her physically? When you said burn her,
like physically, not just with words, but like physically at Morgan Changila's funeral. So it's a very toxic environment. It's very dangerous. I mean, even being a political analyst as a woman, there are not many of us. Even on Twitter, you don't see Zimbabwean women really engaging in their numbers on Twitter, because if you do, people will use that and, talk about you're ugly, whatever, people's sexuality. I think a lot of the young activists shy away because their personal lives get weaponized in ways that doesn't happen for men. But it's also very expensive, right? And we know that finances are gendered. To run for president is 20,000. To run for parliament is $1,000. The number of female female parliamentary candidates that we've been supporting, like Maureen Kademonga, Mutsa, and others, but it's very, very expensive for them. So they have to work twice as hard, and they get targeted very, very easily. So I think women those in the ruling party, maybe they're better off financially, but I think they're not exempt to these toxic, misogynistic attacks that on women. Even myself, engaging on Twitter, there's just so much vitriol that sometimes you lock your account, you go off social media entirely, and you're just doing your job, talking about your work. Attacks are very, very, very mean and just really terrible for one's mental health, physical health, all of it.
True. Yeah. And that's interesting because normally the argument would be, oh, the elections are very violent, which I found quite interesting, but at the same time, you're almost implying that, because elections, there's violent situations, and then women can't handle violent elections, when the same sort of spokesperson of ZANU-PF was talking about his wife, who was actually also fighting in the War of Liberation. So I don't know if it's necessarily because elections are more violent that women are not there, but maybe perhaps at least I'm thinking of the traditional African setting, there is more to lose, I think, for a woman in a violent election, considering, I don't know what the average fertility rate is in Zimbabwe, but at least I know in Uganda, the average woman has about, 5 kids? So if she goes, and even if she's in jail for 2 days, there's going to be 5 people waiting.
And it's actually the violence. There was an opposition activist, More Blessing, who was not only killed, but they cut up her body in like 5 parts, and it was So it definitely gets ugly. What's her name? Cecilia and Joanna Mamombe, Triple C activists and MP, they were abducted, assaulted. The courts gave them the runaround. So it's not a very welcoming space for women. And even within the opposition or within the ruling party, there is a lot of more democratization that still needs to happen. We've talked about Nelson Chamisa not having a vice presidential candidate, but there is a woman who's essentially running as his VP. And I think it's very disrespectful of him to not own her as the VP, because she's doing the work of the VP. We all call her the VP. She's active, she's popular, but he hasn't owned her and embraced her as the VP. Lynette Kare. Lynette Kareni, so KARENYI-KORE. She's good, she's doing the work of the vice president. And to have your partner in crime not claim you publicly in that role, and has never come out and said, she's my vice presidential candidate. I just think that's rude. And maybe, part of the strategic ambiguity, but it's just disrespectful. Right. I think from a female perspective. The fact that Thokozani Kupe, who's one of the founding members of the MDC, is now kind of just relegated to whatever. In a way, these are things that just don't happen to men in politics. So, but what's also interesting is the majority of registered voters are women. Almost 500,000 more women registered to vote than men.
Which should be interesting to see in this coming election. And then also, I think I saw in another podcast about, and this is not only women, it's also about youths. As you said, the spokesperson of ZANU-PF is in his 60s. Are youths not voting for youths? Are women not voting for women? Because why do we get sort of these results when the bulk of the voters are predominantly women and the young women?
So first of all, women and young people exist in the same ageist, misogynistic societies as men, right? So we're all being raised with these same beliefs. So people always ask these questions, but I teach at a historically women's college, and one of the things that we found is that sometimes our students give female professors the same evaluations that we would get as if we were at a co-ed school. And part of it is that we are all being raised in the same environment with the same messed up beliefs about gender, which is very, very problematic, right? And so then to expect that there would be a dramatically different behavior of female voters or young voters is to divorce ourselves from the reality. That's just number one. Number two, we know that the entry for young people to get into politics and for women to get in is very difficult because of the cost and all the other reasons that we've said. So when there are women on the ballot, they tend to get supported. But right now, for example, for for Triple C, there are 6 women only for parliament, just 6 women. So even if we voted for all 6 women, it will still look like women are not being supported, but we can only support whoever is on the ballot. And so that's a really important thing to say. Even in ZANU-PF, there are just not enough women that are running. The VPs, they're both men. We know one VP, I don't know who's going to be the other VP candidate. The fact that Nelson Chamisa has this brilliant, smart, evocative woman, right, who could be his running partner, and he's not utilizing her. It's mind-blowing to me. It's completely, she's brilliant, she's fantastic. Like, she gets the crowd riled. Like, but if he owned that and he said, I have a female VP, and maybe he doesn't, because maybe he's worried that people are not going to vote for him because he has I don't know. You know, ZANU-PF has had a female vice president, Joyce Mujuru, before. So that, it's
not new, So that's very compelling also when you see these things that often tend to be overlooked in these elections. Anyway, so wrapping it up, I guess, I think we can take away that the 2 main players are Nelson Chamisa and Mnangagwa, and then there's also 1 female contender.
And there are 9 others. You know, I gotta find the ballot to find who they are, but there are 8 others.
They're not as significant in terms of whether or not they will win. And so what exactly, what type of reactions do you think might come across if, say, ZANU-PF wins the election once again, or if Nelson Chamisa wins the election? And just generally, would you say this would be a very tight election?
I think it's going to be very, very tight, tighter than the last time. I think we are headed towards a disputed election, if not a runoff.
Okay, yeah.
And both outcomes are not good for Zimbabweans. But from what I can tell, we put the manifestos aside, just focusing on the economy, on people want something different. 6.6 million Zimbabweans registered to vote, which is the highest voter registration we've had, right, since the new...
So high turnout?
No, it's just registration. We don't know what the turnout will be. It's 85% of eligible voters are registered. So we might very well see a high turnout. But I think we are looking at a disputed election. Emerson Mnangagwa is not an appealing candidate. I mean, his rallies are terrible. His speeches are terrible. Nelson Chamisa is an appealing candidate. He speaks well. He rallies well. He gets people, not just young people. He gets them excited. But also the economy. And so I think ZANU-PF is really going to clamp down on people because they're afraid that they're going to lose.
So what so in terms of like in the event that it's found that Mnangagwa has lost the election, will we expect protests? Will we expect another 2008 where, blackout, tussling.
we're expecting
Eventually, you have to
back
fight for
out.
it, or should we expect him to magnanimously accept and move on? And then also on the other hand, should we expect Nelson Chamisa just not to recognize the president or boycott if there's a rerun? The sort of things that people complain about opposition parties in Africa. Should we, do you think that's likely, or should, in any case, will people just accept and hand over?
No, I think it might not get to the levels of 2008, but it's going to be tight.
Okay.
It's going to be intense. Yeah. We worry for people in rural areas and places that are more prone to violence in urban areas. If you recall, August 2018, they brought the guns to the city and they shot 6 people on the streets. So this is the history that we're coming out of. They've been deporting journalists. They've been denying access to election observations to Zimbabweans, citizen Zimbabweans who want to observe the election. Some SABC journalists have been deported. So
for our listeners, SABC is the South African state
South African journalists, yeah. So we're really going into a tricky environment. The Carter Center, their head of missions, was told he couldn't come. So even though the Carter Center got accreditation, the government is determining who can come and who can't come on those teams. So yeah, I mean,
interesting times.
We're in with hope, but it's going to be tough.
Yeah. No, let's just hope that it's going to be a peaceful election. And everyone is sort of watching very vigilantly at what is going on and whether or not this will be the end of ZANU-PF and whether or not we will be seeing a different type of Zimbabwe, or maybe Mnangagwa will change. Who knows?
I mean, we gotta be hopeful. We hope that it will be a fun election where people go and vote, get their purple fingers, celebrate, do what they can.
And how long do you think it would take to get the final results then? Because the election is on the 23rd of August.
Yeah, I'm gonna give it until at least Saturday
of that next week. Okay, sure. Is there anything else that you wish people should know, those who are listening from Africa, from beyond, that they should know?
So I hope the people that are listening that are not Zimbabweans, you keep an eye on Zim, you talk about us on social media, talk about the election. Elections are safe if everybody's watching. I think that's critical. We saw that in Gambia, we've seen that in Kenya, we saw that in Zimbabwe, in Zambia with Hichilema's election, that it was really important for all of us to keep our eyes on the ball. For the Zimbabweans, those who can travel to go and vote, I know it's a last-minute call, but go home and vote. Go home and vote if you can. If you're in the country, you're listening, go vote. It doesn't matter. Your vote matters, right? Don't listen to people telling you that your vote doesn't matter. Your vote matters. For every single level of the election, go and vote. For the Zimbabweans that are in the diaspora and you can't go home and vote, encourage your family, remit democracy, remit encouragement. And then, to the officials listening, give us a peaceful election.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to end it. So my fellow Zimbos from the south of the Zambezi, make sure you vote, wake up early, 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 4 I don't know, but just make sure you the reaction it's going to be worth it, possibly. Just go and vote, encourage people to vote, and we can only hope for a peaceful election. And at the end of the day, what's good for Zimbabwe is good for not only Southern Africa but the entire continent as a whole. And I think we'll just end it there. And for those who are listening, this has been your episode on the Zimbabwean election, which is happening on the 23rd of August 2023. They'll be voting for their president, their legislature, two big guys, Nelson Chamisa, the Citizens Coalition for Change, and Emmerson Mnangagwa, ZANU-PF. And we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, which I hope you just leave us a 5-star rating, follow us on all our socials, listen, share, and we hope you have learned a lot in this episode. Thank you for being with us here, Dr. Chipo Dendere.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.
I am an African.